event, André Aciman is the New York Times bestselling author of Call Me By Your Name, Enigma Variations, Out of Egypt, Eight White Nights, False Papers, Alibis, Harvard Square, and is the editor of the Proust Project. He teaches comparative literature at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. André is joined in conversation tonight by Roswell Encina, Chief Communications Officer of the Library of Congress. Welcome both. The floor is all yours.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. So great to see you, Andre. First, I've got to ask you, I know we saw each other earlier this year, which feels like
I know.
ages ago. How have you been doing? How, especially during the peak of the pandemic in New York?
Well, the pandemic, if you don't get sick, which can always happen, as you know, you never know that you're immune to it, and I might get it. You never know. The catch is that when you have a pandemic, you're forced to stay home, more or less. And staying home for an author is like the most natural thing in the world. It becomes, in fact, a kind of a privilege. I can't go to the restaurant. I can't go and buy coffee outside. I can't go to the gym. I have to be home. Well, that's a perfect excuse for writing. So I've been writing a great deal over the summer after classes were over. And I have no idea if it's good or bad, but I've been working. So I don't know.
I was going to ask you that. Just talking to many authors the past couple months, many of them have been either very inspired by the pandemic, transformed by the events since the death of George Floyd. How have these current events inspired you or affected you?
Well, they inspire me with a great deal of anger and outrage, and I try not to let myself get carried away by it because it's very easy to do this. But on the other hand, I'm the kind of writer, I never write, and we might discuss this more, I never write about current events. I never write about what's happening in the here and now. I'm more interested in what happens between two individuals who are either at a cafe talking to each other or in bed together, whatever you want. It's more the intimate aspect of daily life that I'm interested in, not in the issues that are there consumable, and I consume them too, but not in my writing.
You're talking about, this is a very intimate time. I mean, for many people, they don't get to see that many people. How were you able to express some of that intimacy during a pandemic or during quarantine or during some isolation?
Well, you basically, a writer, you go into a space, and it could be your study, but it becomes also your study is a space where you go elsewhere. I am confronted by a wall. I didn't want to look out the window. I look at a wall because by looking at a wall, I imagine something totally, totally different. And during the pandemic, this is where I go. I wrote a story about a woman in Portugal. I finished that. I'm now writing a story about a young man in Italy. And I'm in Italy. I was in Portugal. I was elsewhere in Italy again last year when I was in New York. So I always drift elsewhere, never in the here and now, always in some kind of unreal dimension where I try to capture what goes on between certain individuals very accurately, without necessarily becoming a reporter, because that's not my job.
Speaking of, summertime and going places, we were talking about Call Me By Your Name, and last fall, Find Me came out, and we were honored to have you at the Library of Congress to discuss it when Find Me came out. I teased you last fall because the last time we were talking before Find Me came out was when we were discussing Call Me By Your Name. I asked you, well, is there going to be a sequel for Call Me By Your Name? And you said, you pretty much said no. Then a couple months later, I get a notification like, oh, there's a sequel coming out. So what made you think of writing a sequel and continuing the story of Oliver and Illio?
Well, it wasn't really a sequel because a sequel I tried to do as soon as Call Me By Your Name came out. I tried to write a sequel because it was a very hot subject. I was totally in love with the characters, with their love. I wanted to be with them again. And so I kept writing about them, and I realized this sounds like Call Me By Your Name all over again, and I can't do that. So I abandoned the whole project. But about 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, I was starting to think of, I wanted to do something with the father, who was an interesting character. I wanted to do something with the little boy that the father is going to have as a child. And I was interested in this, and I wanted to put it together, and I didn't know how. Eventually, I was on a train, and I sat next to this woman who was absolutely lovely, and she kind of opened up to me. And then she got off the train right away in Italy. And I said, I've got to write about her. And then suddenly I realized I'm writing about an older man who meets this woman who's going to go to Rome. He's going to meet his son. And who should his son be? Could be Elio. At that point, everything sort of came together. But when you asked me the question the first time, I was still not quite convinced that this could be possible. Eventually, it became possible. And I might still go on. I'm not closing the doors on the characters of Call Me By Your Name.
How daunting was it to write, to continue their story, or at least to write, you know, to continue the mythology of Oliver and Illio? Because, you know, people fell in love with that book. They fell in love with the characters. They loved everything about them. And people were going to Italy, going on Call Me By Your Name trips.
Yes.
Did you feel any pressure, or did you feel like, you know, I'll do what I do best?
I did not feel pressure, because had I felt the pressure, then I would have been subservient to the medium itself and to the possibilities that exist that are very limited. I can't work that way. I don't know how to. I wish I could, but I don't. And so, in a sense, however much there was pressure, the success of the movie could have translated as a form of pressure, but I just didn't know how to incorporate it. I didn't know how to build on that. So I had to build on what I knew best, which is an old man meets a young woman, a young man meets an older man, Elio and Michel, and then finally, which sort of flowed in 2 seconds, the closing book passage in the book, the last chapter, was the easiest thing to write because it came so naturally. It flowed out of everything else.
Let's talk about that. You know, the first book, Call Me By Your Name, was pretty much in Ilio's voice. And in Find Me, there's a change. We hear it from Ilio's dad, Samuel,
right.
Then we hear it from Illio, then we hear it from Oliver. Why the change? Why? I remember you telling me that, you know, Oliver was just too cocky to write a book. Now, why the change? Did he, I don't want to call him, did he mature? Or,
yes,
what's the change?
The change in Oliver is, and let's talk about Oliver for a second. Oliver was a very cocky young man, very arrogant, very self-confident, pleasant, lovable, but at the same time, very sure of himself. Now that he's 44, he's a bit he's more tentative. He finds that he cannot really seduce the people he'd like to seduce. He's having a harder time. They're already partnered. The people who are younger than he is are partnered. One is married, in fact. So he finds that, God, I take them to a room, I'd like to embrace them, but it's not working out. There's something changing in me. And then he hears a piece of music that reminds him of Elio, and he says, oh my God, this is not over. Something has to give here. So I like that. I like that each character has a moment that is completely different from the characters that you met. The 17-year-old Elio is now 32. He meets this older man. He figures, okay, we'll go to bed together. The older man doesn't make any moves.
Is it fair to say that Illio became more confident as
yes.
Oliver became more, less confident?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Elio is very confident. I mean, he's still himself, but he is more confident. He knows he has experience. He knows how things go when you have a one-night stand, and that's what he was expecting. And the other man doesn't give him a chance, doesn't invite him over, in fact says goodbye. And so he says, what happened? Why did it not, it seemed like an obvious done deal. And so I like these moments where the characters that you met have matured or aged. And then you have Samuel, who's an older man. He's older than he was with Elio, but at the same time he meets a younger woman, and he feels that, this can go somewhere. I had never expected anything like this to happen, and yet sure enough, there it is in front of me. I could say no, but she seems to insist. So he doesn't understand. Anyway.
why did you expand on Samuel's story? I know everybody remembers him with the great monologue at the end of the book and at the end of the movie, and everybody's like, oh God, we want to hear more about him. Is that what kind of urged you to write more about him?
Yes, I thought that a man who can give that kind of a speech it's very special, man. Let's see him in action. Let's see how he behaves when he meets someone. And his attitude is very much, I'm too old. This is gone. I'm no longer have any expectations. And then he finds that the expectations are still there. He was just lying to himself. And she helps him. And he says the most natural thing in the world. Says, look, I have no plans. I can't promise anything, but please come and live with me, which is a famous line by Robert Browning. So,
I mean, their love story, how you, it kind of grew very organically through the course when you were writing it during Samuel's part. And what I also like is just, especially when you, I mean, maybe because I'm, middle age and some of the things that Samuel was going through, you kind of feel it. He has one line here, which is kind of one of my favorites. Lobbies never age. We don't either, I thought. Oh, but we do age. We don't grow up.
yes.
You played a lot with time here. Was that a conscious decision?
It was very conscious because I didn't want it to intrude and call me by your name. I didn't want it there. In Find Me, there's a very clear sense that we age. Some people are about to die, like Miranda's father is on the verge of dying. He knows it, and yet he still is attracted to women, in his own little vicarious manner. And I thought that there's something about time which doesn't make sense to us. And the father says something very interesting, which I've always believed, that there's something shameful about death. Death should never happen. It doesn't mean that we have to keep aging until we're withered, but it means that there's something wrong about the very concept of death. It offends us. And so there's the opposite, which is, yeah, we grow old, but we stay children. And I think it's true of you, and it's true of me, and of everybody else. You could be in your 80s. Sometimes you forget that you're not 14, and it's a beautiful feeling to feel that, okay, today I was 16 again. What a nice moment that was. It didn't last too long, but it was nice.
That's what I liked about it. I feel like that there's something hopeful about it, that that the characters and maybe in real life are all looking for either a change or a second act or a next chapter. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of shows for the three main characters of this book.
It does. And one of the things that some readers, I mean, I've had initially the response of readers, and I'm sure this is going to be the response of people who get the paperback for the first time, is disappointment. They thought that they were going to end up with Elio and Oliver, and they're ending up with Samuel. Who cares about Samuel? And then there's the whole wave of other people who write to me and say that Find Me can actually be more moving than Call Me By Your Name, because it deals with the issues frontally as opposed to so obliquely that you don't realize it. There's something about time which is so dangerous, which is why Elio and Oliver at the very end are aware that this is the last chance they'll have. And it's a wonderful moment when you realize that, God, I had given up and now I am given this last moment. I better seize it. There's something wonderful in that.
That's a good point. I feel like a good tone of the book is everybody either is wanting something or wanting to be found, hence the title, or just plainly as humans looking for love. I feel like that's what makes it so personal.
I think, yeah, because I mean, if you have faith in God, then you've got the answer right there. If you don't have faith in God, or if you quarrel with God, then you have only one other thing. I mean, you can have patriotism, sure. Okay, that's going to serve us a lot these days. But you can have love. That's the only other alternative. You have either faith or love. And if you have both of them at the same time, what a wonderful thing it is. I have no faith. I just don't believe in anything. But I do think that love is what has rescued me all my life. And I believe it. I mean, if I don't believe in that, then I have nothing. And so I can't live that way.
I do want to remind the folks watching that you please, type your questions, and we'll be asking Andre your questions in a little bit here, but we'll continue. One thing about the book, and this goes from Call Me By Your Name to Find Me, music plays a big part of it. I mean, you could almost picture a score or a soundtrack behind all of this as it develops, especially in Find Me. I mean, the parts are kind of broken up into kind of music genres. Why did you do that? And the structure of it that way?
Well, because I think that, well, music has always inspired me. I love classical music, and it inhabits my life, put it this way. If I wish I could compose, because then I would be doing that, but I can't. There was something very enriching in the book because each person has a musical moment. And music is ultimately a form of symmetry. It gives shape and order to things that are normally without shape or order. In other words, we are like amoebas, we have no shape. Music sort of contains us and gives us the form. And for a book to have music as a metaphor means that it is looking for some kind of anchorage in time and in some form. Now, the form that I particularly like is, of course, writing. But in many respects, it is music that is the dominant key in the book. And it brings people together. Sami wants to teach Miranda how to appreciate a Beethoven sonata. Then there is of course, the cadenza that is missing, and that becomes sort of a mystery for Michel and for Elio. And then there's a piece of music that Oliver listens to and says, oh my God, I haven't heard this in years. He's still inside me, this sense of Elio, because Elio used to play that piece of music.
The cadenza, I'm glad you brought that up. Where did that come from? The mystery of it and the structure of Michel's story, how it came out of it, is quite moving, honestly.
Well, it's because there's a moment in which Elio says to Michel, I want you to hum this tune with me, as your music teacher always does. Hum this along with me. And Michel says, no, I absolutely won't. And he starts humming it, and he starts weeping because he's so moved by that. So the cadenza is a musical moment in a Mozart concerto, and basically it brings them together. And Elio does something absolutely wonderful. He wipes the tears from the face of Michel. If music doesn't bring people together, what else can I say? It's either food or whatever.
There's a passage here that I just want to read that has a lot to do with the music and how everything kind of brings it together. If you don't mind, it reads, it's on page 238 if you have the paperback. Music is no more than the sound of our regrets, put to a cadence that steers the illusion of pleasure and hope. It's the surest reminder that we're here for a very short while and that we're neglected or cheated, or worse yet, failed to live our lives. Music is the unlived life. You've lived the wrong life, my friend, and almost defaced the one you were given to live. That is almost like a slap towards Oliver, or was that the intention? But it's very telling, and it almost even to take it, not it could be applied to any of our lives beyond Oliver and Elio.
I think it's true. I think the music is, in fact, it's so perfect. A musical construction is perfect. There's no question about it. Even a Beethoven quartet in the late quartets, however dissonant they might seem, they're perfect. And basically, when you're confronted with that perfection of form, you realize my life has been a mess. Or worse yet, how many of us have said, I've lived, X number of years, and I've missed the real life that I was meant to live. I've been in the wrong profession. I've been with the wrong partner. I've been with the wrong city, whatever. And you realize, and that's the reminder of what perfect art does. It reminds you that your life has been lived imperfectly. And there's nothing you can do about that except recognizing it. And sometimes recognizing that is a plus. It's not a minus. And I think that's the beauty of art, is that it brings us closest to, not to anything better in us, but it reminds us that we want the better in us. We want the best in us.
You know, who else wants the best in everyone is our fathers. So there's a big part of this book that's about fatherhood, between Miranda and her dad, of course, between Illio and Samuel, and between Oliver and his children. Why make that, I guess, connection in this book? It's a very big part of it.
It is, because I think that fatherhood and motherhood, the same thing, except, you know, I loved my mother more than I loved my father 10 times, and yet I never write about my mother, but I write about my father, whom I had a hard time with. He was a wonderful father, but it was difficult. But I think that fatherhood in that instance is just a metaphor for something that is dying to skip into the next generation and the one after that. We like that there are many generations of us in the past and in the future. Even Elio, when he goes into the room of Oliver in Call Me By Your Name, he's aware of his grandfather speaking to him, says, Elio, don't do it, you'll regret it. But he does it anyway. But there's a sense of many voices in us that come from the past and into the future. And I love that, the sense that Sami's boy is 7 years old and his name is Ollie. And Elio asks him, and Oliver asks him, do you know why you're called this? He says, yeah, I know. He says, why? Because of you. There's a sense of instant intimacy between this boy and Oliver, who is probably closer to that boy than to his own children, who are in New England.
You also touched on Michelle's father too, and you know, that's quite revealing.
Yes, because I do think that there, and you will notice that in the fatherhood image, there is a possibility of some kind of gay encounter happening. And in Michelle's father, Michel is gay, there's no question. He has a son, but he's gay. And he's gay with Elio. But his father had a very intense relationship with this Jewish violinist, but also piano player, who writes the cadenza for him and sends it to him from the camps. And so you have a sense that here you have this aristocratic Frenchman who is also very wealthy, who loves this Jewish man, and the Jewish man is totally sort of condemned by the family. They don't want to see him. In fact, they may have denounced him as far as we are concerned to the Nazis. The point is that the father figure is itself, it's complex. It's not simple. Fathers can be gay too. And that's something that is, you have it also in Sami, in the film itself, and in my novel. People have insisted on assuming that when the father says, I could have had what you've had, Elio, when Elio asks him, I'm jumping on many things, but when the son asks, when Elio asks him, does mom know? It's not, does mom know that I was sleeping with Oliver? As the readership has told me and taught me, it's, does mom know that you could have been gay? You see, and so these are points that are—
You're right. I took it the other way too. I understood it. Did mom know about him and Oliver? So yes, I like that different layer there. That
no, readers have told, readers teach me so many things because they say, don't you see this? No, I didn't. I'm sorry, but you're right. It makes more sense this way. So,
speaking of your readers, you have a big gay fan base because of Call Me By Your Name. You asked a lot of folks out there, what's your favorite gay novel? And Call Me By Your Name is always on that top of the list. But I do want to ask you one thing. There's always seems to be, I think we're at a time in literature that we could probably stop branding novels as the gay novel or the lesbian novel or the queer novel, and they should just be labeled under, you know, fiction or nonfiction. How do you feel about that?
I think that Call Me By Your Name and Find Me sort of delve into a gay relationship. So they are gay novels. There's no question. But at the same time, they are also exploring what is this thing that we call love? I never use the word love. I may have told you this already. I avoid the word love because it's so heavy-handed and it's so obvious, and it becomes trivial when you're trying to understand what is it that brings two people together for life. You know, just calling it love just doesn't answer it for me. So it's a love, it's an exploration of love, and it's also a gay novel. On the other hand, if I wanted to examine what is a gay life, what a gay man feels when he's alone by himself, I wouldn't know how to do that. And so I never went there. I would much rather describe two persons in love who happen to be gay. But I will always stay away from pretending that I know what it's like to be gay. So I've sort of shielded myself and not gone into places where it would be inappropriate for me.
You mentioned earlier that, you know, a lot of people were asking, oh, why is this entire part about Samuel and not more about Oliver and Illio? I actually personally thought, I actually love that part about Samuel, but how do you respond to the folks that wanted more Oliver and Illio in Find Me?
There's not more. I mean, the story itself, basically, what do you want from them? You want them to meet again, right? And if they meet again, they're going to live together. Fine, okay? Because they love each other. And if they're going to live together, as I always say, what are they going to do on Sunday afternoons? They're going to do the laundry. And then they're going to fold towels. They're going to live a very domestic life. And why do I want to do that? That doesn't turn me on. It doesn't stir me up. It doesn't do that thing. I leave it for other people to write about domesticity. I live a domestic life. I don't have to write about a domestic life. You see what I'm saying? I prefer to. There was nowhere to go except to bring them together. That's the furthest. It's very much like a Jane Austen novel or an opera. Once the people are married or decide to get married, hands off. Because
however, even the domesticated parts of the book are just so romantic. Just, you know, when Samuel and Miranda go to the market just to buy the fish and, you know, and to eat, you know, I can't remember, apricots and walnuts, everything just was either, I hate to say sexually charged, but there's so much, everything was flowing like a, you know, a song or a poem. Everything was just so beautiful, but that you kind of want to fly to Florence and or Paris or even just to, you know, the Northeast right now for Oliver's story. But you make it sound like music.
Well, it's because it's their first day together. Imagine if they went to the marketplace every Saturday morning, you know, as I do. You know, we have a sort of green vegetable garden, vendors outside, and we go there and we buy fish there. It becomes ordinary. And literature, I'm sorry to say, is never about the ordinary. It wants to go and find the special moments that are sort of charged and incandescent. Otherwise,
is that where the vigils came from, André? Like remembering these important parts of a person's life and kind of reliving or retracing them?
I think we all do that. We're embarrassed to do it, but we all have rituals where we go back to certain places, certain houses, certain moments in the city, or certain spots, as Wordsworth used to call them, spots of time. You know, you basically, we all have these moments when we seek out order in our lives by returning to certain moments. And there's that wonderful scene when Elio takes his father with Miranda and they walk to the very wall where Oliver had kissed him very passionately one night in Rome, 20 or 15 years earlier, or no, 10 years earlier, and after Elio had thrown up because he had had too much to drink. And that moment was special for us. He says, look, when I'm in front of that wall, I talk to the wall and the wall talks back to me. There is order in the universe. And the sense of order in the universe is so important, especially to someone like me who's sort of been forced to live in various places, many of which I never really fell in love with, and with people that I didn't always like, you know, and that sort of thing. So finding order is my way of saying, it can still be made beautiful if you know how to pick the spots.
Speaking of places, how do you pick the places for your books? You know, it was Italy in Call Me by Your Name. It's almost across the globe in Find Me and in your other books as well. Do these places mean something to you significantly, or do you feel like it's a good way just to tell the story?
No, I have to live there. I basically, when I write about Italy, I move to Italy. And notice that all 4 stories are taking place in November. You don't see, there's one, first of all, it's a city called Rome, where I've lived and I know Rome. And they have a lunch outside in the veranda, but then it gets cold because it's November. Then the next story takes place in Paris, which I've lived in. And it's cold, it's November in Paris, and it's kind of chilly and gray and so on. And then you have an Indian summer in November in New York, which is another city. I've picked the cities that I basically have lived in. And then I said, there's got to be a 4th city because it's where I was born. And so I situated the 4th city in Alexandria. So for me, it's true that every chapter has a musical notation, but at the same time, all 4 cities come together and they represent my life.
Do you mind if we talk about the movie?
No, I love the movie.
So when I'm not sure if everybody who's watching right now knows, and I know I asked you this before, that if you were in Call Me by Your Name, for those who don't know, would you like to tell which part did you play at?
Oh, there's a moment in which there are 2 gay men who show up for dinner at the house of Professor Perlman. And they are dressed in the same clothes. And I wanted to make them, I had a point in that story. I'm one of them, by the way, in the movie. And they are, as the father says, I never wrote this line, James Ivory did. Do you think you're laughing, you scorn them because they're ridiculous, or is it because they're gay? And I wanted to basically give you a portrait of every straight man's image of what a gay man is. I wanted it to be sort of ridiculous, because that same exact night, as these people are downstairs being hosted, upstairs, Elio and Oliver are spending their first night together. So I wanted the contrast to be very powerful. And I was asked to play the role, and I said, I'll play the role, but don't make me learn any lines because I'll forget them. And so they had me say anything I wanted. So I did, and it was a lot of fun.
How was that, seeing you know, one of your cherished books come to life right in front of you and you playing a big part in it?
I mean, it was a very short moment. And it's funny because here I am playing the role of a gay man, and my wife is watching with Luca Guadagnino on the small screen, and she's saying, "You're doing this very well." So I didn't know that I was a good actor. I'm not a good actor. I've never acted, but it was a very natural moment to play. And the person who was my partner in the film is actually the producer of the film. So we're having a great ball together.
Were you surprised by the success of the movie?
Totally. I just thought it was filmed in 6 weeks. It had almost no budget. You know, it was just very hastily done. And I figured it's going to basically I didn't even go, as I probably told you, I never even went to Sundance because it was too cold, and who wants to go to Sundance? I'll buy the movie on DVD when it comes out. I had no idea that this was going to be the fantastic, successful film that it turned out to be. So I immediately went to Berlin to see it the next time it was showing. I never anticipated the book would do well. So,
fantastic is probably an understatement. It's award-winning movie too, along.
Yes,
like
actually, I think that Elio should have gotten an Oscar, absolutely, and I think that was it Michael Stuhlbarg for the role of the father, definite. I can't think of a better monologue in the past 10 years.
I should say that Michael Stuhlbarg narrates the audiobook for
Yes.
Find Me, so that's quite beautiful. Where are the discussions? It's kind of hard to talk about movie making when we're in a pandemic around the globe. But what have you heard regarding an adaptation of Find Me into a movie?
Nothing. You asked me that question 9 months ago or 7 months ago, and nothing has changed. Nothing has happened.
What?
It's a hard film to do, you know, because it's broken up in 4 segments that are very discrete, and to put them together, to make a whole thing out of them is going to be near impossible. So you're going to have to isolate one or the other, and it's very difficult, and I understand. So I have not heard anything. I'd love it to be made into film. I'm not joking. It's a wonderful thing to have a movie made out of a book you've written. And I was lucky because Luca did a fantastic job.
And have you heard from Luca or Timothy or Army or Michael
No.
since the book came out?
I've heard quite a bit from Michael because the others are, you know, they're traveling all over the world and doing so many things and acting in so many films and directing so many different projects. So no, we haven't spoken to each other. And I think that's typical of the industry itself. You do something together and then you sort of separate, and years can go by without even meeting again.
So before I see a lot of questions pouring in. Let me ask you one question before we go to the questions from the audience. And you kind of touched on it earlier. Will you consider writing a 3rd book about Elio and Oliver? And I remember teasing you about this a couple of months ago. That
And what did I say?
We should call it the Peach Trilogy because, you know, there's a 3rd book.
I don't know. I'm toying with an idea, but it's still totally sort of, it's not even incubating. So, but I like the idea. I love the characters. I love who they are together. And so I've been toying with it, but I've been doing many other things as well. So this is something that I don't want to abandon it, but I cannot promise that I'll do it. So I don't know yet.
So the next time we chat, if that 3rd book comes out next year, you know, I'm going to pull the tape from Politics and Prose and ask, this is what you said. So also, you know, it's archived at the Library of Congress, what you said last time as well.
Okay.
So before we take questions, I want to remind people who are watching, if you don't have it yet, we encourage you to purchase Find Me. Just click on the Politics and Prose, you know, website and purchase Find Me. And I also forgot to mention that Politics and Prose, I think this is the first time we're announcing this, is the official bookseller for the 2020 National Book Festival, which is hosted by the Library of Congress. Usually this is held at the Washington Convention Center, and it attracts about 200,000 people in one day. But because of obvious circumstances, we are going virtual, and it's going for 3 days. So it will be September 25th to 27th. So you could be watching anywhere in the world and participate in the National Book Festival this year. And we're so excited that Politics and Prose will continue to be our official bookseller. So if you're wherever you are, you can support Politics and Prose. And please, you know, also support your local bookstore, wherever you are. All right, you ready for some questions, Andre?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about music. Here's a question from Seth Cohn. His question is, you mentioned your love for music, especially classical music. What music inspires you that's not classical music?
Oh, I have a particular weakness for Italian rock. Maybe because in my adolescence, I lived in Italy as an adolescent, and I loved Italian rock songs. They're they're tamer than most rock music, but they're lovely songs, and I know them and I love them. And when I'm exercising or doing nothing serious, I love to listen to Italian rock and French rock also.
What is an example of Italian rock and French rock?
Oh, I mean, saying the songs of, oh God, I mean, there are many. Mina is one of them, and she's very classical, of course, at this point. She's very established. But Lucio Battisti, who's dead, and Lucio Dalla, who's another one that I happen to adore their music, so I listen to it. And you have a very famous song called Caruso, which has become world famous because it's sung by Bocelli. But it was originally composed by Lucio Dalla, and it's a wonderful song. And of course, they're crooning a bit, which is what I like. So that's
You know, everybody's probably pulling you know, their iTunes music right now and searching for all these artists. Here's a question from Kyle Johnson. I love the way you write and speak about music. Can you recommend any other contemporary fiction writers who write about music in a way you find meaningful, serious, and fulfilling?
I think Milan Kundera wrote about the Beethoven quartets, which is my favorite piece of music, and he mentioned it. And so does Virginia Woolf, by the way. She loved the Beethoven quartets, and she wrote about them in her diaries. And but I can't think of a really contemporary writer who writes about music. I can't think of one.
Oh, let's change it up a little bit. Here's a question from Teddy from Bowie, Maryland, who's asking what motivated the major transformation of Illio's mom from Call Me By Your Name to Find Me. She felt like such a less present character in Find Me compared to Call Me By Your Name.
Well, in Call Me By Your Name, she wasn't that present either. She was just there like a decoration. She had her friends, they played cards together. She went to see them, they came to see her, they had tea. It was very sort of tangential as a character. She was never significant. The mother figure in Enigma Variations is mean as hell. But then I put it this way, my mother was my source of all love. And I don't feel comfortable touching on mothers because they're sacrosanct. And so I made my mother into a beastly person out of Egypt because she was so savage, but I loved her. And she loved me. So that's sort of one of those things. I don't touch it. Fathers are easier to write about.
Now, here's a question from Laura Barnett. She says, thank you for giving a name to ghost spots and vigils. I've always kept mine to myself. Why did Elio share his vigils with his dad? I know you touched that a little bit, but I love how Laura calls them ghost spots.
Actually, I call them that too in my book. They're basically it's the same thing. It's a ghost spot is a place that has become sort of that radiates presence of someone who is possibly no longer with us. I just lost a very, very good friend last week. And I know that when I will pass by his house, which I haven't done, I will be reminded of him. And I'm scared of that. But ghost spots is exactly those moments where the presence of something bigger than us is there and hovers there. And so you respect it. And we normally do this when we go to somebody's tombstone because that is the ghost spot par excellence. But by and large, we manufacture our own ghost spots all over. We don't admit it to other people. They're more private. And in fact, we might walk with people to our ghost spot and never tell them. By the way, this is my ghost spot. This is where I think of X, Y, and Z in my life. We may not even tell them that because it's so private. Of course, the beauty of a very powerful relationship is that you want to tell them, you will tell them, and they will want to know. It's when they don't want to know that you feel, oh, yeah, I'm alone.
Our condolences, Andre, for the loss of your friend.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
I know
I'm
that.
dedicating my next book to him, by the way.
Oh, that's very sweet. Speaking of which, could you tell us, before I get to these other questions, you did open that door a little bit. Could you give us a hint what this new book would be about?
This new book is about, it's called Homo Irrealis, and it's about various authors, cinematographers, photographers, painters, composers, all of whom basically, without necessarily knowing it, were not in the present. They were either in the past or in the future or in a kind of different zone called the conditional subjunctive, if you've learned the grammar. It's a different zone where the might have been is more important than the what is.
I do love that. It sounds like many of the characters are going to be in the arts again. And I feel like that's what keeps these characters very alive.
They're all artists.
Here's a question from Eileen Heidemann. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. And her question is actually one of the questions I asked myself when I was reading it. I forgot all about this to ask you. Why is Oliver so unhappy with his wife?
Because somehow it no longer satisfies him, and possibly because he realizes that, and he always knew this, even when he married her, that there was something missing in their relationship. It was a hasty sort of slam dunk thing that he decided to get married for many reasons which are not necessarily honorable. He felt that this was the way to basically establish himself in real life, get married, have children. It's the thing to do. And he realizes that this is not him. This is not what he wanted. He wanted something else. And he hears it when he hears this young man who is partnered with another man playing a piece of music for him. And he says, I know that piece of music. It's my unlived life.
Oh, well, yes, you got me there. Here's a question from Marcel Young. Do you suggest reading Call Me By Your Name before Find Me? Or will the characters be less relatable if reading Find Me first? I personally encourage you to read Call Me By Your Name first, but go ahead, Andres.
I will answer this by saying this. See the movie first. Read Call Me By Your Name second, and then read Find Me.
Wow. You know, most authors say read my book first before going seeing the movie. But I personally think Find Me is a standalone book.
It can stand, it certainly should stand alone. Absolutely. In fact, it might be more powerful if it stands alone, except the last 20 pages may sort of not quite make sense to you unless you knew there was a history behind it, which we don't want to reveal.
Yes, no spoilers here. So here, let me find more questions here. And I apologize because I'm reading from an iPad. Here's a question from, I'm hoping I'm not butchering her name, from Malika Taalbi. She asks, Call Me By Your Name reminds me so much of the lonely, romantic, and impassioned arc of Tender as the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and that is set in France and Italy. Do you think there is something about the Mediterranean that lends itself to that type of emotional narrative?
Unfortunately, yes. It's a bit of a cliche if you wanted to stereotype, but for me, as soon as I situate something in Italy, it's got to be at the beach or close to the beach, and suddenly the senses are all aroused. Food, wine, people, skin, it all comes together. It's impossible for me to think of Italy without necessarily invoking all those other tropes, which are derivative, embarrassingly derivative, but they work for me. They certainly, they animate me, and I'm never tired of them.
Here's a question from Jody Franklin. It's about the passage I read earlier about the unlived life. She asked, that passage just read is something you wrote in an essay about W.G. Sevald. Has Sevald's work influenced your work?
Yes. Yes, Sevald has influenced my work. I loved his first book. I hated his second book, and I adored his third book. He is, I think, of all the people who should get the Nobel Prize, he should have gotten it. There's no question. He is exactly what I like in literature. It's about going inside as opposed to outside, and finding out all those coefficients that we have inside us and trying to articulate, which is very difficult to do, what it is that, how are we understanding life? How are we putting things together? How do they not make sense even when we thought we put them together? And why is there like sort of always an underlying reality underneath our own? Like, and he has this wonderful image of a sunken Welsh city that had to be sunken because of, they had to build a dam and an artificial lake. And so there's a whole city underground, under the water, which was alive once upon a time and might still be. This is the irony. And Sevald is always in that zone, and I love that.
Oh, let me find a couple more here. Here's a question from Barbara Balaj. Going back to your book, Out of Egypt, the synagogue in Alexandria, Egypt, was recently renovated and reopened. What do you think about it? Do you have memories of the synagogue?
I didn't like to go to synagogues because I was not religious. I hated religion. But I was taken to the synagogue, to that particular synagogue, many, many times. And I went back to Alexandria in 1995, 30 years after I was expelled from Egypt. And I walked into the synagogue, and there was these two huge boxes filled with skull caps. Filled with skull caps. Now, here's the irony. There are only about 7 Jews left in Alexandria, if that. There are probably 3 now. So you renovate the synagogue as a gesture to the history of the Jewish presence, but there are no Jews. So what do you do with an empty synagogue? It's like suddenly the Vatican is entirely empty, and you fixed it up and you made it look beautiful, but there are no people going to pray there. It's just a building, you know? So my thought is, it's a bit ironic that they rebuilt the synagogue only after there were no more Jews left.
Here's a question, it's an anonymous question. Has teaching comparative literature changed how you read books for pleasure?
It's a difficult question because I no longer think I can read books for pleasure. I read a book with a pen. I underline, or I sometimes criticize, or I find myself, oh God, this is awful. I can't go on reading this. The pleasure, because I've become a sort of professional, that's a bad term, it's not a good term. The pleasure aspect of reading and discovering new lives, new worlds, new possibilities has sort of been taken away from me. And I think the profession does that. I think that if I retire, and I hope I do soon enough, I might be in a position to rediscover the joys of simple reading. But of course, I don't read that much because I'm always writing.
I understand that. Let's do 2 more questions here. Let me find something here. From Deletta, her question is, if you will write more about Elio and Oliver's story, will you give more chapters to Oliver? Is her question.
If I were writing another book about Elio and Oliver, yes, I would. I would try to understand him because he's a very difficult person to understand. He's not my automatic, he's not as easy for me to understand as Elio was.
Let's end this in some fun notes here. There's 2 anonymous, and we'll just go through this fast. I have to ask this because it makes me chuckle personally. Anonymous says, first peaches, then figs. What's next?
You have to realize that they changed the word figs in Italian because the word for fig is actually the name of a particular organ in the that's the pudendum, okay, the vagina, okay. So they had to change the name altogether, and I did it basically because I was having fun. There's a very mischievous side to me. Yes, I think that fruit becomes an ongoing metaphor for the extra that is in sex that we normally don't talk about.
And I know I teased you about this before, that the peach industry should be thanking you, Andre. And on this note, I want to say what Deletta is saying here is pretty much how we all feel. This is not a question, but I just wanted to say thank you for this beautiful story because it understood myself more. I understand who I really am, and I will never be grateful enough to say thank you so much for this, Mr. Aciman. Lots of love from the south of Italy to you. Stay safe.
What a lovely message. What a lovely message. Lots of people say that to me, actually, which is a wonderful thing, that through my prose, that they have understood themselves. For me, it's such a unanticipated, unintended, but very gratifying thing to hear, that basically I have helped a lot of people come out to their parents because of this book, which makes me very happy.
I think it's very sweet. And I think you have helped a lot of families out there, whether they're parents or kids coming out. You really help pave the way for them. Thank you, Andre. It's always good to see you. Hope to see you in person soon, my friend.
Roswell, thank you. Thank you so much.
And I encourage, of course, everyone to purchase Find Me from Politics and Prose.
Thank you so much. Before we go, I do have one more question for you all, which is Roswell and Andre, what are you two reading right now?
Oh, well, I read 4 serious books back to back to back to back, so I needed a good laugh. So I am reading Colin Joseph's memoir, A Very Punchable Film, which it's surprisingly really good. I encourage people to go read it.
Excellent.
Well, and I'm reading a book called Last Summer in the City. I'm rereading it because I'm writing a preface to it. And so I wanted to reread it again to make sure I got everything right. It's a very, very good book. And I enjoyed reading it last year, and I'm rereading it again. I've been doing a lot of prefaces recently. I don't know why, but people ask me. So it's my way of, I've just finished writing a preface for Justine by Lawrence Durrell, which is 50 years old at least as a book, and I enjoyed it tremendously. So I find myself rereading books as opposed to reading books.
I think a lot of us are doing the same. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. This was a really beautiful conversation, and I think a lot of us needed to have some of this beauty in our lives right now. Thank you to the audience for joining us as well. Your patronage again is what is allowing us to do these events. Your book sales keep our doors open and the books coming. So please do purchase Find Me, available in paperback today. Thank you again to LOC. We're so excited for National Book Festival. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Roswell. Good night, everybody. Stay well and stay well.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Roswell, thank you so much.
Good to see you, Andre. See you soon.
Yes,
Bye,
I hope so. Bye-bye.